I'm grateful to be here with this wonderful, amazing community, and I'm grateful to all of you who stayed after lunch on the last day to come to this presentation. And I also have to start with a first hard truth. I co-created this presentation with my friend and colleague, Alfredo Hernandez, and the cumulative impact of his HIV meds over 30 years has made him now too unwell to be able to travel and bring his amazing energy to this conference, but he sends his love. Here we go. Well, I should stipulate that this isn't a presentation about HIV per se. What I want to talk about today is identity and the representation of illness and stigma. But every story has a backstory, and here's mine. In 1981, I was an undergraduate at Stanford. I was studying human biology, and I was immersed in the richness of this community, even back then. And the resident fellow in the dorm where I lived as a sophomore, Sarah Hall, a guy named Cannell Jackson, said that he was starting to hear these stories up at the baths in San Francisco about otherwise young, healthy, vibrant guys who were getting really sick really fast. And in June of that year, 1981, the CDC published the first accounts of pneumocystis pneumonia, which was popping up in Los Angeles. As the magnitude of this illness sort of dawned on all of us, and we understood that this was something that was going to be very big and very bad and would need to be grappled with, the gay community mobilized to really challenge the received power structure in medicine. And they said, we want more money for research, and we want testing protocols that happen more swiftly and approval of new therapies, and we want treatments that are consistent with our identity. You know, it was out, and it was loud, and it was actually kind of beautiful. Larry used the word on the first day of disruptive co-creation. I think this is a great example of disruptive co-creation. And it worked. 30 years later, we have treatment as prevention. So we have really good meds that mean if you are exposed to HIV and you get tested really early and you get linked to treatment and you have access to those meds and you take them on schedule, your viral load is going to be sufficiently suppressed and you're unlikely to pass the virus on to anyone else. And so we have the goal of getting to zero, of ending AIDS by 2030. That goal, that idea that we can make a chronic illness like HIV mainstream and manageable, and that hinges on getting people engaged in care and connected to care, means that there's this impetus to put a really positive spin on being HIV positive. You know, look at these images in the major CDC public information campaign for HIV treatment. These folks are young, they are athletic, they are attractive, they have loved ones around them. I just think we have a really hard time holding the gaze of people who are not so positive, who are not so attractive, and they have chronic illnesses. My mother, who's not one of these beautiful ladies here, has COPD, and she's had a major mental illness for most of her adult life. Both of those things are well controlled with medication. She has osteoarthritis. She has scoliosis, which means she has contractures and she's in a wheelchair most of the time. She's going to be 88 in about 10 days, and a lot of the times she just doesn't bother to put her teeth in, right? And she's not going to be part of a PSA. This isn't how we talk about or convey to the public what it means to have chronic illness or multiple chronic illnesses. So what does that mean for someone like Alfredo, who is aging with HIV and not doing so well?
I am Alfredo. I am 51 years old. I was born in Mexico. I'm an openly gay. I am an activist. I am an educator. And I am a person living and aging with HIV. And my story is complicated, but it's my story, that's me. Since I've been positive, I always have had a good communication with my peers, and the communication had been about comparing side effects. And sometimes we coincide, and when we see that, let's say, of the 15 friends or peers that I spoke with have this bad side effect, and 3 don't have it, I go back to my doctor and I say, wait a minute, can we change the medication here? Because you're giving me something that is gonna make me get sicker for something else. And so I think I want the people that knows me to understand that although I'm doing the best I can, it's been difficult for me to voice what I need. And so I'm trying very hard to ask for what I need without feeling guilty, without feeling disabled. It becomes challenging because there are times that you're taking a pill. In my particular case, for instance, if I am having a dinner and I'm out on a date with someone, I know that certain pills are gonna cause me to go to the bathroom immediately or right away kind of thing. So it was very embarrassing, or it has been very embarrassing. So what I do is I just don't go out on a date, or at least know when I had to take the pill. So it's almost like I have to rearrange certain things that I do, but in a way, if you think about it, it's almost like I'm rearranging my life to please somebody else. And then over time, you get exhausted. And I got really tired. And you know, perhaps not necessarily that I'm rearranging my life to please somebody else, but I'm rearranging my life so that the stigma or rejection is less. That's the truth.
So patients tell their stories to their friends, and they tell their stories to clinicians. Let's see what clinicians hear.
My name is Dr. Judith Prophet. I'm a social worker, sex therapist, activist. So many of the men that I treat experience this kind of profound sense of being damaged goods, that phrase that we hear often, and that can really manifest itself in many ways. It can be feeling less attractive, less energetic. When we speak of isolation, you might think of someone by themselves in a room, which may be the case, but often more it's a social or emotional isolation. People may be surrounded in a crowd of friends, but maybe only a few of those people really know what's going on with that person. And there's this sense of a lack of connection and therefore a lack of support. And that really furthers this idea that there's something wrong with me, that I can't really share what's really going on or who I really am.
In addition to being a clinician, David is also a long-term survivor of HIV and a recovering meth addict. And it's been really nice at this conference to see how many people are here who have that dual role of being a patient and a clinician. I think that's a complicated space to be in also. And an important one, those are important voices to be represented here. The virtual world has sort of allowed for the creation of these safe spaces where people can talk to one another about their illnesses, about their suffering, be a little bit more authentic and honest. And we see those in closed groups on Facebook, bloggers who are largely talking to each other and trying to make an outreach to others outside of the communities. I really, I'm hoping that Simpler, if they haven't done already, or some other group that is doing mining of social data, will really look at how we respond to texting about and social data about suffering as opposed to other kinds of things that people put up there. Alfredo is a gifted photographer, and he posts a lot of beautiful photographs of flowers and sunset and the things he sees out in his external world. And he gets an awful lot of like and a lot of traffic when he does that. When he writes a long post about not being able to sleep for 3 nights, and he can't get medication for the pain of his neuropathy, so he can't walk around his neighborhood, and he can't get his groceries, and nobody's been to see him in 4 days. You know, he gets a couple of people commenting, hang in there. We just have a really hard time, I think, understanding how to experience suffering even in these virtual spaces. So it's complicated, right? For patients, there are all the issues that come together, especially when there are comorbidities. We've heard about so many of these over the last couple of days. Treatments have side effects. If you don't want to stick with your treatment because of those side effects, you're going to be labeled non-compliant. Anybody who's had a couple of drinks after a really bad day knows what we mean by maladaptive coping. If you want to try and reduce your isolation by, getting some kind of relationship, well, maybe you're just setting yourself up for more rejection. I also want to acknowledge that it's hard for doctors, too. The presentations earlier talked about all of the ways that we see patients as data sources rather than people. Our system is not set up to incentivize, let alone permit, the actual building of relationships. There's no, and if your patient comes to you and they've got intractable pain, well, you better be careful, because if you prescribe opioids, we're coming after you. This is just really hard to get right. But what if, here's my shameless plug for the design principles that you all are carrying around, I hope, in those heavy cardstock cards that Larry and the team invested in. I love these design principles. I think people are here because they buy into these design principles. I would just like to add to this that I think we need to add a layer of urgency, like those early folks who mobilized to act up. We need to understand people are suffering now. Our healthcare system is really broken. Let's not just get together and talk to one another, all the people in this community who already believe these things. Let's act up. Let's make a difference. Last thought, the people in the disability community have this dichotomous construct that they really rail against of heroes and zeros. Right? So we see news coverage of the triple amputee who summited Denali. Wow, isn't that amazing with that disability, what this person was able to do? They really are so impressive. And on the other side, we see stories of people with profound disabilities, and the attempt is to evoke a sense of pity and see them as being deserving of our charity without the acknowledgement that they may have anything to give back to the community. And I really think that we do this to clinicians, too, right? We talk about that wonderful hospice nurse who stayed with the patient through the last days and hours of their life and really just never looked away from their suffering. Or we chatter in the hallway about that terrible neurologist who gave Eric his diagnosis of ALS and said, here's my card, and if you need to see a chaplain on the way out, let us know. It's just, that negates our humanity when we talk, when we frame one another in that dichotomous way. So I want to argue that for patients and for providers, let's just all accept that it's complicated. Thank you.